All right, everyone, time for some more poll analysis because what we're beginning to see is that there is a very linear trajectory for Trump right now that's taken him up about 4.5 points since his low in June. That was on the heels of worse coronavirus news, economic fallout, unemployment, and so forth. Since there's no reason to believe that the trajectory of the economy, jobs, and so forth, and everything else is going to change in any marked way, from here on out, I can imagine that trajectory continuing. And that's my basic bit of analysis here, which is that I think we're seeing a long-term trend form, which takes Trump above 47 by election day. This could be wrong. It could stabilize. It could hit 45. It could, go back and forth around where it is now. It could stop at 46. It could go down a little bit. He could end up, evening out at 44.5 or something. I just don't see there as being a reason for that because we know that his support can hit 48 because it did before in the aggregate. Again, use an aggregate, not an individual poll. We know it can hit that level. So there's no hard ceiling below that threshold. If there's no major things going on that are wrong, and if history continues to be as it generally is, and you see an evening in polling towards the end of the campaign anyway, around this particular time of the campaign, there's no particular reason to believe that he won't be above the 50-50 mark sort of threshold at 47% approval on election day that he needs to be at. According to all the mainline pundits, based on Obama's re-election, he was at 47. Of course, he was re-elected, and it wasn't even particularly close. I think that he can be re-elected a little bit below that, but I think that he would be above that threshold. And that, in my opinion, is the break-even point more than the you have to be here to have a chance point. Or maybe a little bit higher. In fact, I wouldn't be too surprised if he's at 48, 49, based on the metrics that I see. Again, my initial expectation was before the first debate he'd be at 44. He would then gain a half a point per debate, taking him to 45.5, which he's arguably at now, basically. He's about a point ahead, which, by the way, was the same exact aheadness against Hillary in 2016. I never expected him to even be ahead in a single poll that would be aggregated until the very end. I was questioning whether even that would happen. It did towards the end. He was ahead of my expectations, and of course, that's one reason that he won. The other thing is the evening in the polls towards the end of the campaign, I think compensates more than for that last point and a half, and then you have the enthusiasm gap. Arguably, that gets him to 50%. He could be, in theory, Trump could win the popular vote based on the metrics that I'm seeing right now. It's a long shot, and of course you'll have ballot harvesting and considerable amounts of rigging, probably to the tune of hundreds of thousands of votes nationwide. That will happen, unfortunately, in this election. I just think that it's going to be fairly surprising for certain pundits on election day. Now, of course, this flies in the face of most polling logic. What happened in 2016 and in 2018? The polls were blatantly wrong. In 2018, it was a little bit closer to reality, but the Democrats were expecting to potentially regain the Senate. They certainly weren't expecting to lose 2 seats. I called it. In fact, that was sort of the expectation. Between 53 and 54 at the end of the day for the Republicans, it's 53, and they barely lost, the cinema seat there. It's almost perfect a call. In the House, of course, it was known by anyone who was studying the numbers that the Dems would gain seats, but the Democrats were sitting there expecting to gain almost twice as many as they did. Thus, Cenk Uygur on live stream breaking down, quitting early and saying, oh, this isn't a blue wave. No, we've lost. The Senate's not Democratic. This is no blue wave. Oh, this is terrible. And it was really funny. He's like, well, take your lumps. At least you gained seats in the House. That's good news, I guess. I don't know that that's going to happen this time. There are people with the same sort of hyperbolic takes as we've had in all past elections. So you've got people saying, well, New York could go for Trump because of rioting. Well, no, it's not going to happen. California will go for Trump because Newsom's an idiot. That's not going to happen either. There are also people that are expecting Georgia to be in play. I don't think that's likely at the end of the day. They were hoping for Texas, but then they were also hoping that Beto O'Rourke would be able to win there too, and he lost massively. They threw literally everything they could at the race. Biden is managing to outspend Trump, and yet he's losing ground against him in virtually all national polling at the moment. The peak for Biden was really just the trough for Trump back in June. Yeah, if your approval is at 41%, I can understand why your opponent would be doing well in battleground state matchups. He's regained 4.5 points since then, and he's still rising. At what point does that take states like Georgia and Arizona off the table because of turnout differentials? Assuming that there is a differential. And of course, this is technically, we don't have the results yet. We don't know that that will happen. It could be at the end of the day that the polls are wrong and Biden gets an extra half a point. But do I think that's likely? Based on historical evidence, no, not really. If we assume the same, let's apply just the differential, 2.2 in the final results from 2016. Now keep in mind, since then, Trump has more in-party enthusiasm. His opponent has less in-party enthusiasm, by a fairly large margin, by the way. And you still got several debates to go in which Trump has an opponent that's not quite as good as Hillary Clinton was in all respects. That's why he lost against Biden in the CNN opinion polling by a smaller margin than in 2016. Keep in mind, that's a very liberal audience. For Trump to almost approach 30 in the final result is actually pretty good, to tell the truth. If we apply just that same threshold, Trump keeps Arizona. That's not taken from him. He potentially flips Minnesota. He retains Florida and North Carolina. He retains Ohio. That gets him very close to the 270 threshold. He needs to flip one of the other significant states. Virginia's in play, although not by a huge margin. He needs to maintain Wisconsin, or maintain Michigan, or maintain Pennsylvania. Probably Wisconsin's the easiest of those, and it gets him over the threshold right there. There are people saying that Nevada's in play. Nevada wasn't even really in play last election. It leans blue enough against Trump that it wasn't something really reasonably targeted. If Trump manages to have two, let's say he has two pickups, Minnesota and Nevada, both of which are in play. I think Virginia's and New Hampshire are much more long shots, and it looks like Maine is going to stay blue, which is predictable. As long as Trump manages to retain Florida and Arizona under that situation, and in Georgia, which again is as likely to go blue as Maine is to go red in this election, he only needs one further state, and he's already across the threshold. Biden cannot get enough votes to win. Just one of those four major states. That's all he needs. And the thing is, this is another situation. You remember in 2016 where they were saying, well, it looks like Trump might not win Ohio. Well, he might lose Indiana. He could easily lose, Texas. They said Arizona was in play. Georgia's in play. All of these different red states are in play. Well, he's probably not going to get Florida. It's like, Hillary's 3 points ahead or something like that. They were all wrong. All of the polling was off. You only need about a 2-point aggregate differential to make a path forward for Trump as we speak, despite the fact that he's not at 47 in the aggregate yet. I mean, in approval polling. He would have at least some feasible way forward. It would technically be less than a 50-50 shot, but it's there. I think it's going to be more than a 2-point differential, because if I look at the in-party enthusiasm, the perceived rally turnout, the fact that the Trump campaign is knocking on doors, thus refreshing people's minds and reminding them to vote, and Biden's not actively campaigning at all. When you look at potentially the sympathy differential, because Trump has COVID, this could play at least a small role in the election. I don't see anything there to suggest that there will be less turnout differential than in 2016. And I expect that Trump's upward polling trajectory, yes, will continue, taking him above 47 by Election Day. At that point, once the final debate is over, I'll be able to make a more solid prediction about what I believe will happen in the election. Don't let anyone make a solid prediction until after the final debate, though, because there could always be some major surprise there. Biden could have an aneurysm on stage. Trump could have coronary. Keep that in mind. That's about all. Peace out.